Welcome back to Talking Points. I'm excited today because we have a big fish and we're privileged to have him in the studio. I'm Gloria Bomahari, your host, and we'll be talking about Nigeria once again. Issues happening in Nigeria and how it affects us as citizens. So today we're glad to have in our midst, he has been a former this, a former that, but for the purpose of this discussion, we're going to narrow it down to three formers. He has been a former commissioner for commerce in Rivers State, a former commissioner for information and communications in Rivers State, and the most recent being the former federal lawmaker representing Etche and Omuma at the House of Representatives. He is Chief Ogbonna Nwuke. You're welcome, sir.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
You're welcome. We're happy to have you too. Now, we have this issue about wages in Nigeria. Just a few days ago, we had the country was shut down because Labour, NLC, TUC, every labor organization or union they were trying to hold the federal government at their neck to extract a commitment for salary increase. That unfortunately crippled the economy for at least 24 hours. Then eventually they called off the strike. But shortly afterwards, we saw a situation where the president himself sent a bill to the National Assembly, which they've already consented to. And the bill has to do with 300% wage increase for judges at the federal and state high courts. So that implies that the CJN will earn over 5 million naira monthly. The judges at the Supreme Court will earn over 4 million. Then the president of the Court of Appeal will earn over 4 million that's monthly wages. Here we have civil servants asking for over 400,000 monthly, and the federal government bluntly refused. So we want to know what currently is playing out. Is it an instance of you can't have free lunch in Freetown? Is it that the civil servants are not working enough, or is it that the value placed on them is not as much as those placed on the judiciary? So
I think let's start from the perspective of workers. I thank God that many years back too, I was a civil servant and I served the state. Now, no one can toy with the civil service. And I'm very certain that if you look at the issue of workers' struggle all over the world, one of the reasons why we have labor workers there is plainly remind society of the struggle by the working class. And so everybody knows that workers are the engine room for instance, if they are civil servants of government, and if they are private workers of production. Because for those who have a clear understanding of management, what does manager manage? Resources, workers, and other ingredients are required to make sure that you have the organization running. So I believe there have been conversations going on with workers over the issue. There have been some back and forth, and because the matter is sensitive, and the matter relates to how much Nigeria really can afford. All of us know that this economy is in dire straits, and there are certain demands that may be considered astronomical to a large extent, and not as reasonable. And you can see that most Nigerians are saying, yes, workers deserve to have an increase, but they deserve to have an increase within the limit of reason. So this conversation has been going on, and but to the glory of God, of course, the tripartite body has been making progress. We've seen an act of goodwill on the part of workers. The suspension of the strike for 5 days, according to them, a commitment by the federal government that the president is willing to pay slightly higher than 60,000. That's progress, and that's more than 100% increase when you are looking at the take home of, because now we are talking about the minimum wage, the minimum that the lowest paid worker in Nigeria can access, and there'll be some progression in terms of positions as you go higher. Some more money also. So when you put all of that together, and some people have come out with staggering figures, it suggests that we may be paying as much as 9.5 trillion. So
wow, that's a lot.
now, where would that money come from? And for a segment, and you are talking about, that's recurrent. You're not talking about money for capital expenditure, which provides infrastructure, which keeps private sector running. Because private sector provides certain services, and it's from those services that they make their own returns. So frankly, it's not as if anybody is saying that the workforce or workers are underdogs. They are not. And they have shown us that they can shut down the economy. And all of us saw it happen. But I see also that you alluded to the issue of judges. Now, judges are at the center of whatever we say about the rule of law. And as you know, in this country, there have been accusations and counter-accusations about the conduct of judges, about judges falling victim to
corruption and all
tendencies of corruption. In order to have a justice system that works, that is responsive, that is transparent, and that is accountable, this conversation about raising judges' salaries have been going on. I'm sure, of course, you know that the period, they have extended the time of work, age limits for judges.
Okay.
Even the same way they're extending for those in the academics. Now, the reason is simple, because you need to tap into the experience that some of them have, and then you need to lay a solid foundation for those who will take over from them, who have become knowledgeable by virtue of working with those ones who experience, and also make sure that they don't fall victim of those who are parading funds. You know that there are suggestions that justice is for sale in Nigeria.
Yeah, that's what I want to say, because there's a school of thought that says they are paying them this much because maybe sometimes they depend on them for favorable judgment. Then there's also another school of thought that suggests that maybe the workforce, the civil service now, they should trim it down, make them more specialized. For instance, if you work in the Ministry of Agriculture, you actually perform your tax as someone working in that ministry. So maybe that's a school of thought. Most people are saying maybe the federal government is also holding these civil servants responsible for what is currently playing out, because, for instance, the agriculture ministry that I talked about, they are not planting anything at all levels, so that's another school of thought. So we're yet to confirm or disprove that, but with what is playing out, with this current increase in the justice sector, the judicial sector, and other sectors, like even the police, they don't have this huge amounts going to one individual. So these are some issues that we are concerned about.
Now, yes, your concern is understandable, but we also should understand that people play different roles in society, and comparative analysis of what each
group
perform in society. It shouldn't be, because some are more technical, more specialized than others. Now, let's say to ourselves that if we are not mindful, a lot of people forget that in this country there was the so-called Dodger Award. What happened? It led to inflation. eventually, led to mass retrenchment of workers eventually. Okay, and that's what is likely to happen if the expenditure pattern in terms of recurrent expenditure is something that the system cannot manage. Even the private sector will lay off workers. So, what should we be thinking about this time? We should be thinking about a currency that can buy more, an economy that is stable, where prices are not as jumpy. Because when you raise these salaries as we are likely to do, now what will happen? Let me tell you, landlords will raise rents. Even transporters who are already making the killing, to take you from point to point, will increase their transport fares. Those in the marketplace will raise the cost of foodstuff items. Now, what that means is that inflation will just get up and start running. So sometimes I wonder what kind of economic books we read, but clearly you can't dismiss the fact that looking at current trends, that there's need to marginally increase salaries. Nobody is going to argue with that. And I think that was the intentment of the law when it says after every 5 years, you will need to renegotiate wages. Okay, so that is to also accommodate developments within the economy.
Okay.
But to whom much is given, much is also expected. It will be necessary because workers are part of factors of production. And if the workforce is not producing sufficiently, then it shouldn't be asking. They should be creating that wealth. Workers are here. Of course, over time, we've always heard that workers create the wealth. But they need to create wealth, because if we don't have sufficient wealth to go around, then the implication is that the wealth is not coming as it should. Yes. Okay, so that is it. But when in terms of what we are saying, it would be nice to properly define this issue of judges. Over time, this conversation has been going on. So it's not as if the president just suddenly woke up overnight and raced to the National Assembly with a bill. They've been tinkering with it. Conversations have been going on the same way conversations are going on with Labour now. Of course, there is a union also in the judiciary. And so these conversations are going back and forth. So for me, I will think that whatever we do, we shouldn't act in a manner where all the money that we need to enhance economic activity in this country is spent on the current expenditure. Because nothing comes back from it. Okay. So if we don't create sufficient money for capital projects, then development won't take place.
Yes, thank you. Recently, I went to Google and I searched for the issues in Nigeria. And Google told me that the major challenges hindering social development in Nigeria include corruption, inadequate infrastructure, high unemployment rates, and insurgencies. Now, let's come to Rivers State. Nigeria has several states, and Rivers State, where we are speaking from, also fit into this mode of having most or some of these issues affecting it. And now our governor, that's Siminalayi Fubara, just celebrated 1 year in office. Now, as a major stakeholder in Rivers State, what would you advise the government to look at going forward? Because the countdown to another 1 year is currently on, which eventually will lead to the end of the first term. So apart from infrastructure, what else would you advise the government to look at?
I think that I listened to Fubara the other day while presenting the scorecard, and the emphasis he placed on human capital development is something that we cannot overlook. And as you know, some people are going to school, but they are not employable. because of the kind of education, looking at the curriculum, or rather the curriculum that is in use, some people still need retraining in order to be to fit in certain sectors. So clearly, it's a case of being between the devil and the deep blue sea. But let's look at Rivers. By the grace of God, we are not. There was a time when cultism was fashionable, a time when militancy was fashionable. And I recall those days when we were reporters in the field, editors in the field. Of course, there used to be this kind of tendency. But the Rivers State that we have today is almost calm, regardless of the differences that we have seen in the political space. There has been no violence. Of course, there have been the fight of words, but it has not led significantly to a threat to peace. Okay, so that's. I think that the issue of insurgency, for instance, which is prominent in the northeast, which is spread to the north central, which is even evident now in the northwest, may not be religion based as we have been made to believe. Because there are people who are mining those solid minerals that are not captured by the country and who keep a large army of seemingly dissident actors armed to the teeth who carry out such crazy operations. Of course, we know of the feud that exists between farmers and herders. All right, and I'm glad that the bill to create ranches is making progress on the floor of the National Assembly. Perhaps it will also help curtail some of the threats we have to food sufficiency in this country, and then reduce this tendency to kill one another. Now, in the East, you can understand what's going on in the Southeast. For better or for worse, there's a demand for a Biafran state. And I don't know whether the demand is political or whether the champions of this campaign really mean to succeed. But my advice would be for those in the north, southeast, that if you want to be president of Nigeria, nobody's going to give a separatist power. Nobody. Because nobody knows what you are going to do with it as a separatist. One who is saying you don't have faith in your country. So how are you going to govern a country that you don't have faith in? So if the whole thing is about politics, because I know there was a time in the Niger Delta when the issue of resource control projected so many arguments and which may have resulted in a South-Southerner becoming president of Nigeria. So, but I think that's up to the actors there. But government must do what it must. And there's a lot of conversation running now that the time has come to have state police. And I think that will help because you need to have a knowledge of the terrain that you are policing in the first place.
Yeah.
And so we're thinking, that's my thinking, that those who are responsible for security in any given environment must be part of that environment because they know who is living where, they know who is doing what, they live in those communities, so they know what is going on. And we don't need to have people who have come here like buccaneers. They're supposed to secure us, but they're interested in exploiting us. And so they can turn a blind eye when serious matters would need to be addressed are popping up. So my advice would be that we should work strenuously in the direction of state police. Those who think that the governors should misuse it don't need to worry. The policing system will develop over time and become even better. Now, because if you suspect that the governor will use it, it's because that if you are giving power to, that's what you want to do. Yeah. So you think that the next person next door has the same agenda. I think we should begin to look at issues properly, locate our arguments properly, and give society sufficient chance to breathe. Because right now, most of us can't breathe. And
so you're suggesting that part of what Simfuba should look at, the governor, should be working with other governors to get the state police.
Of course, that should happen. But if you see, comparatively, like I said when I started this conversation, River State is largely safe. I mean, and that safety is what we need to create. When you add it to infrastructure that's being presented here and there, that's what we need to attract investors.
Okay.
Now, because honestly speaking, if you don't have investors, there's a limit to how many people can be employed by the civil service. So it's time to make sure that the agricultural sector works. And there's a strong reason for that. Agriculture will be responsible for food sufficiency. And the excess will be utilized as raw materials. Okay? And if we were to pursue clear agricultural policies, it will create job opportunities. So it's a win-win situation. Now, those people who are working in the Ministry of Agriculture, who ought to be extension service officers, who are doing nothing. Our soil is good enough that perhaps we don't need fertilizer at this point. But what happens to the fertilizer allocations? What happens to those fishing nets, those gears? Where are those people who used to visit the farms and let farmers know that there are improved seedlings?
Yeah.
This is what you can gain by relying on technology. Did they suddenly evaporate? Nobody sees them. There were people who, those old days, who went around teaching people how to do fish farming. Where are they? There is no information coming from the Ministry of Agriculture suggesting, nationwide, suggesting that this is what you should do. Instead, we find that NGOs, more or less, or some specialist groups are responsible for some of the awareness that you're seeing. So it's a mixed bag, but I think that SIM needs to keep the peace, because he needs the peace for development, and he's done well with it. A man who continuously says no price is too huge to pay for peace, and I'm not shocked that we have what looks like it on the surface, that we have peace. Of course, there will always be disagreements. Managing those disagreements is the responsibility of the leader and the institutions that have been created by society. So
now you're bringing me to my last question now, because let me just stop you there and ask this question, because I was thinking, or a lot of people, not me. Right now, I'm speaking on behalf of people, because we do voice.
That's the work of the media.
Yes. So now people are saying, recently there was a face-off between the state governor and the assembly members. Now we're in June, and local government chairmen ought to leave. So what are we supposed to expect? Will there be crisis, or will... Okay, so this brings me back to my next question. This is June, and you recall that there were issues of kind of face-off. Not kind of face-off, there was serious problem between the governor and the lawmakers, because there were the pro-Wike lawmakers who wanted to impeach him. Then another smaller group that now has speaker, house leader, and all that. So now we have another pending situation, which is with the local government chairman, because for what I can gather, he has about 2 or 3 LGA chairmen working with him, then about 20 with Wike. That's the Minister for the Federal Capital Territory. So people are now, everybody is like holding their breath, expecting an explosion again. What if they decide not to go? What if they stay longer than they're supposed to stay? Or what if there's a revolution against the government? So please, as somebody in the system, we need to know what the law provides and what is obtainable.
There is an entry date and there is an exit date. And I don't imagine that the council chairmen who have been in the saddle do not know when that time is up. You know, it's unfortunate that in Africa we talk in terms of tight leaders. Okay? No local government chairman who knows that his time is up will waste his time. You just go and hand over and go your way. You are completed your tenure.
So there's no provision in the law for them
see,
to...
what the law, is a combination here. The law prescribes that after 3 years, counting from the date when they took oath of office, they should be leaving about now. And any reasonable council chairman should have prepared his handover notes, knowing well that also if we were to follow convention, that around this time, they may be required to hand over to
their successor.
Not directly, but those who HPMs or something.
Okay.
Those who manage
the local government council.
Because their time is up. I'm not aware there is any timetable, electoral timetable for local government elections. That hasn't been announced.
No, it's not.
So what this means is that within the period that council chairman will not be in office, there are people, competent people in the administrative sector who can take over. If we also were to follow convention, then within this period, caretaker committee members are appointed to manage the council, pending when elections will be held.
Okay, so now it doesn't, the House of Assembly does not depend on the size of lawmakers sitting, because right now we have about
what has happened is that some persons have shot themselves in the foot. Section 109(1)(g) says that anyone who leaves his political platform, in other words, where the vehicle that he used to get to power, within the pendency of his service time, and joins another party, is considered to have lost his job. But there is a proviso which says, except there is division. And I don't think that the Constitution was talking about division at the state level, because political parties, all the properties in every state belongs to the National Secretariat.
Okay.
And if there is no crisis at the national level, I cannot imagine that what has happened in Rivers is a division. You know, of course, people can disagree, agree. So those matters have been tested. The courts have said clearly, because there are people who are saying, is that provision of the Constitution homostatic, or is it self-serving, self-executing? You know, so these arguments are going back and forth. But the pronouncement of the courts show exactly what it should be. A Labour lawmaker recently was asked to go by the Supreme Court. We are aware that some people in Cross River State who cross-carpeted under circumstances like this have lost their seats. And it's not surprising that now you are hearing that people who sang on the mandate we shall stand, are now turning around again to say, no, we didn't leave the PDP. So, but you and I know that you cannot place, in law, you cannot place something or nothing. So are they telling us that what we just saw, what we have seen,
maybe it was edited by the video,
or maybe it's an illusion?
Yeah.
So the more you look, the less you see.
It's possible. So many things happen in Nigeria.
In any case, but what is standing between us and the rest of them is that operate a system of laws, and the judiciary has made certain pronouncements. That pronouncement forbids them from parading as elected representatives of Rivers people.
Okay.
Forbids Martin Amehule from parading as speaker. And the new assembly speaker, that's Victor, assembly has come out to say, look, all those amendments made by some riotous lawmakers are non and void. And so what we have is a return to the status quo, meaning that the seats of these persons have been declared vacant, even though a final decision has not been taken by the court. And we need to wait for that. But if we are to look at what is before us, precedences that have been set in law, although I agree that no two cases are the same, but given the precedents have been set, these people are living on borrowed time. And honestly, to refer to your last question, yes, they may not be, in terms of majority, the required number, but the law says that they have the capacity to act.
Okay. So
particularly when all of these people have lost their
seats.
Their seat.
Okay. So we should be looking at a local government that might be run by HPMs, or a local government that would have caretaker
committees, because there is an assembly that will consider it.
Okay.
Because you see, it is the assembly's responsibility to oversight local government councils, not the responsibility of the executive. So everything, once a pronouncement comes from Parliament saying councils dissolved, hand over, because the right of oversight is vested on the assembly by the Constitution. Then they should be packing their bags and saying goodbye to office.
Okay. So thank you so much for being our guest. And to our viewers, we want to thank you for staying with us. I still remain Gloria Bomahari, and we just talked to Chief Ogbonna Nwuke, former commissioner, former federal lawmaker, and he was also the spokesperson for the Sinfobara campaign organization. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you for inviting me, and let me congratulate you on what you are doing here. The world is becoming increasingly a global village, but I'm glad we're having many more voices. Congratulations.
Thank you. You know, to add to what he said, he's my senior colleague in the media profession. We call him, some of us call him pen terrorist. So we thank you for giving us that privilege to also be part of the pen community. Thank you.
Thank you.